Picture this. The jagged peaks of Idaho's Sawtooth Mountains claw at a blood-orange sunset in October 1981, their granite spines casting jagged silhouettes across the vast whispering wilderness. A family of hunters, father, sons, and daughter, treks deeper into the twilight trails of Sawtooth National Forest. Rifles, slung like old friends over weathered packs, laughter echoing off the ancient pines that have stood sentinel for centuries. They're chasing elk through the thinning light, chasing the thrill of a clean harvest that binds generations, chasing the raw pulse of survival in a land that demands everything from those who dare enter. Elias Harlan, the grizzled patriarch, leads with a steady stride, his voice booming an elk bugle that mocks the fading day. Beside him, his eldest son Caleb scans the underbrush with a mix of reverence and quiet rebellion, while daughter Lena moves like a shadow herself, her eyes sharp on the horizon. Trailing with boundless curiosity, young Tommy chatters about the dancing lights he's glimpsed in past hunts. The air is crisp, laced with the scent of pine sap and impending frost, the ground crunching under boots, dusted with early snow. But as dusk devours the last rays, shadows stretch unnaturally long from the boulders and trees, twisting like living tendrils that coil around trunks and creep across the path. One by one, voices fade into the gloom. No triumphant shots ring out. No calls of success pierce the silence. The family vanishes, leaving only 4 rifles planted upright in the loamy earth of a hidden clearing, barrels pointed accusingly at the stars, scarred with swirling runes that seem to pulse with an otherworldly warning, as if carved by hands unseen. And etched into the frozen ground, elongated tracks, eerie imprints 18 inches long, weaving in serpentine patterns too broad for any known beast, too deliberate for wind or illusion, snaking toward a sheer rock wall where they dissolve into nothingness, as if the mountains themselves had reached up and pulled the Harlans into their depths. For 41 years, the Sawtooth Shadows have haunted the backcountry trails of Idaho, a spectral riddle that lingers in the minds of hunters, hikers, and locals alike, a case file, gathering dust in Boise archives, while evolving into a campfire cautionary tale. Was it the work of a rogue grizzly, emboldened by the encroaching autumn chill? A bitter family feud erupting into something irreversible amid the isolation? Or something far older and more primal guardian spirits, rooted in Shoshone and Nez Perce lore, ancient entities said to roam these peaks, judging intruders and enforcing a sacred rite on those who disturb the balance of the wild? Whispers from native elders speak of shadow weavers, ethereal forces that mimic human forms to lure the overzealous, their tracks a final mockery before claiming souls for the earth. Then, in the summer of 2022, a solitary trail camera, planted by a wary outfitter monitoring bear activity, glitches to life in that same forsaken clearing, its pixelated feed stuttering through static, to reveal masked figures gathered in a ritual circle under a simulated dusk, hands tracing air runes that match those on the rifles. The timestamp inexplicably rewound to the 17th of October 1981. The footage unearths not just digital ghosts, but a survivor's long-buried guilt, a confession that reframes the nightmare. A father's desperate bear lure trap, intended to fabricate a trophy kill for financial relief, a clandestine cult of wilderness zealots, interpreting it as desecration, and the crushing weight of a hunting legacy twisted into tragedy. As we delve into the Harlan family's vanishing lost to the encroaching dusk of the Sawtooths, we'll trace the footsteps that led them there, the echoes that lingered for decades, and the truth that finally emerged from the gloom. What dragged them into the abyss? Let's follow the trail. To grasp the full weight of the Harlan tragedy, we must first immerse ourselves in the lives of the family at its core, people whose existence was as intertwined with the rugged contours of Idaho's high country as the roots of the lodgepole pines that dotted their world. The Harlans weren't casual outdoor enthusiasts dabbling in weekend pursuits. They were descendants of pioneers who had carved out an existence in the shadow of the Sawtooths since the late 1800s, when silver miners and fur trappers first tested the mountain's mercy. Generations had passed down not just heirloom rifles but an ethos of coexistence with the wild, a philosophy born from necessity in Stanley, a speck of a town cradled in the Sawtooth National Forest, where the population hovered around 100 souls, and the economy teetered on logging, ranching, and the precarious bounty of seasonal hunts. By 1981, those foundations were cracking under national pressures. The recession gripped the nation, timber mills shuttered amid environmental regulations, and small communities like Stanley felt the squeeze acutely, with families like the Harlons clinging to traditions as lifelines. Hunting transcended recreation for them. It was a ritual of sustenance, a forge for character, and a defiant stand against modernization that threatened to erode their way of life. Elk season in October wasn't merely opportunity, it was renewal, a communal affirmation that the mountains still provided for those who honored their rhythms. Yet beneath this veneer of unity lay subtle fissures, the pull of urban opportunities drawing the young away, the unspoken strains of providing in lean times, and a folklore that painted the Sawtooths not as playground, but as a living entity with moods as changeable as its weather. Fast forward those 41 years, and the Harlan legacy had morphed from personal loss into a tapestry of communal myth, threads woven from survivor accounts, faded photographs, and the persistent hum of speculation in trailhead gatherings and online forums. In Stanley's modest diners and around crackling fire pits at Redfish Lake Campground, tales of the shadow guardians proliferated, ethereal protectors drawn from indigenous oral histories, where the mountains were imbued with watchful spirits that extended tendrils of darkness to reclaim harmony disrupted by human ambition. Shoshone stories, passed down through elders like the late storyteller Mary Yellowhawk, described these entities as Nekia, shadow forms that elongated at twilight to ensnare those who hunted without humility, leaving behind tracks as cryptic sigils of judgment. Nez Perce counterparts echoed this with warnings of Ki-em-me, peak dwellers who mimicked prey to test resolve, their presence betrayed only by impossible imprints that defied animal anatomy. These weren't idle superstitions. They rooted in the Sawtooth's real perils, unpredictable avalanches, sudden whiteouts, and a topography of sheer cliffs and hidden crevasses that had claimed lives long before the Harlans. But the 2022 glitch on that trail cam injected a modern jolt into the ancient lore, a device meant for empirical wildlife data, instead flickering with anomalous footage, static, dissolving into silhouettes that suggested human agency masked as spectral. It forced a reevaluation, bridging dusty case files with digital scrutiny. Yet, to uncover how it all unraveled, we must return to the Harlans themselves, stepping into their boots on that fateful autumn day. At the forefront of the family stood Elias Harlan, 48, the unyielding patriarch, whose presence anchored the group like the ancient cedars that flanked their Stanley home. Built like the mountains he revered, broad-shouldered, with a barrel chest honed by years, felling timber and wrestling gear up steep inclines, Elias sported a salt and pepper beard streaked from endless exposure to wind and sun, and hands roughened to leather from decades gripping axes and rifle stocks in the yards of the Sawtooth Lumber Company. He eschewed the comforts of urban sprawl, viewing cities like Boise as sterile traps that softened the spirit. His world was the high country, where he rose before dawn to brew coffee over a wood stove, mending traps or sighting in scopes, while the mist clung to the valleys. Elias embodied the hunter's creed he instilled in his children. The wilderness reciprocated respect with patience and precision, a clean, ethical shot that honored the animal's life and the provider's role. His journal entries from that crisp fall season read with a poetic introspection, rare for such a pragmatic man. The Sawtooths stand eternal, unforgiving to the hasty, but generous to the steadfast. These peaks have seen our grandfather's shadows and will outlast our own. Today I take the young ones into their embrace at dusk, forging grit against the coming winter's teeth. May the guardians nod approval. Elias harbored dreams of entrusting the family's prized 30-06 Winchester chambered in 30-06 Springfield, its walnut stock worn smooth from generations to his eldest son, seeing it not as mere firearm, but as a vessel of Harlan essence, etched with initials from great-grandfathers who had felled game to feed through harsh sieges. Yet those closest to him, including his brother Jed, who shared late-night whiskeys at the local tavern, discerned a deeper burden. A mill layoff earlier that year had severed Elias's steady paycheck, leaving bills to mount like snowdrifts and whispers of foreclosure on their modest cabin. The hunt then transcended tradition. It was a precarious gambit for redemption, a chance to bag a trophy bull whose tags might fetch premium at outfitter auctions, easing the financial vice. Was this outing an idyllic escape into familiarity, or Elias's silent desperation manifesting as one final, bold assertion of control over a life slipping from his grasp? Striding purposefully at his father's side was Caleb Harlan, 22. The ambitious son positioned as the bridge between the Harlans' storied past and an uncertain future, his very existence a microcosm of the era's generational tug-of-war. Tall and wiry, with the same piercing blue eyes that Elias passed down like a genetic compass for navigating fog-shrouded ridges, Caleb had just returned from Boise State University, armed with a forestry management degree, a credential that promised paths into conservation work or guiding services, yet found no immediate foothold in a recession-ravaged job market. He idolized his father, absorbing lessons on reading elk rubs and wind shifts during boyhood treks, but a subtle chafing had emerged in recent years, fueled by glimpses of broader horizons. City friends, boasting of tech jobs, a world beyond the ceaseless cycle of seasons and survival. Around the family fire, Caleb would jest lightly to diffuse tension. "Dad, maybe we upgrade to GPS someday. Leave the guesswork to the maps." Yet his personal notebooks revealed the magnetic pull of his roots. "These granite spires course through my blood, unyielding as the rivers they birth. One day, I'll helm the Harlan line, blending old wisdom with new safeguards for the wild." On that October trip, Caleb shouldered the practical responsibilities, clipping bear spray to his belt and packing an experimental thermal scope borrowed from a ranger acquaintance, an early nod to technology that Elias tolerated with gruff amusement. Post-disappearance rumors, pieced from Jed's recollections and town gossip, hinted at brewing friction. Elias viewing Caleb's book learning as dilution of rugged essence. Caleb quietly resenting the expectation to forsake ambitions for mill work or full-time hunts. Did this undercurrent of resentment bubble silently beneath the surface camaraderie, a fault line waiting for the dusk's pressure to crack? Completing the core trio on the trail was Lena Harlan, 19, the quiet firebrand whose resolve burned with an intensity that challenged the gender norms of 1982nd's rural Idaho, where women in hunting parties were often sidelined as observers rather than equals. With her hood drawn against the encroaching chill, rifle a sleek Winchester Model 70 inches, 308 held with the poise of a seasoned marksman, Lena moved through the terrain with an innate grace, her dark hair escaping in wind-swept strands that framed a face etched with quiet determination. From adolescence, she had proven herself a prodigy behind the scope, outshooting brothers during family competitions and dreaming aloud of launching her own outfitting business to lead women-only wilderness tours, empowering others to claim the peaks as their domain. Elias affectionately dubbed her the guardian of the group, a title she wore with subtle pride, often taking point to scout for movement or assess wind direction. Her correspondence with a close friend back in town, letters sealed with wax stamps of pine needles, portrayed a soul tempered by the mountain's indifference. Out here, gender fades like morning fog. The ridges test your core, not your station. Heading out with Dad and the boys feels solid, unbreakable like the ancient stones that birthed these trails. Yet Lena guarded private aspirations. A tentative romance with a young park interpreter in Ketchum. Whispers of enrolling in a guiding certification program that would pull her toward year-round employment in the National Forest System. These plans simmered unspoken during family gatherings, a potential rift in the Harlan fabric. As the group pressed into the afternoon, did the hunt's isolation compel Lena to confront this crossroads, her steps heavier with the weight of choices yet to voice? Bringing up the rear with an infectious wide-eyed wonder was the youngest, Tommy Harlan, 14, teetering on the cusp where childhood innocence collides with the wild's unforgiving tutelage, his youthful energy a counterpoint to the adult's measured pace. Curly-haired and compact, with cheeks still rounded from boyhood and a .22 caliber Ruger slung casually over one shoulder, Tommy approached the outing less as participant and more as avid apprentice, his questions punctuating the trail like birdsong. "Dad, do the elk talk back to your calls?" Or "Caleb, what's that gadget? Do see ghosts in the trees?" Elias doted on him with a tenderness reserved for his last child, envisioning echoes of his own formative years in Tommy's unjaded gaze, often pausing to demonstrate how to chamber around or identify fresh scat. Tommy's contributions to the family hunting log, scrawled in a childish hand on pages dog-eared from prior seasons, captured a whimsical lens on their world. Shadows stretch funny at dusk up here, like they're playing tag with the light. Dad says it's the old guardians keeping watch, making sure we don't take too much. Those naive observations would later send shivers through investigators combing the entries, their innocence clashing against the horror they unwittingly foreshadowed. Tommy revered the hunt as pure escapade, oblivious to perils like hypothermia or disorientation, viewing the Sawtooths as a vast playground ringed by adventure. The overall family interplay formed a taut bond, akin to a well-oiled rifle mechanism, shared jests over trail mix by midday, collaborative peeks through binoculars at distant mule deer, Elias's booming anecdotes from past hauls drawing chuckles from all. Yet lurking beneath this harmony was the faint undercurrent of evolving dynamics. The elders' nostalgia, clashing with the youth's forward glances, a collective grief over the tradition's slow erosion as logging bans and population shifts reshaped their valley. In that moment, as they crested a ridge overlooking the deepening valleys, the Harlans seemed invincible, the mountains their eternal ally. The 17th of October 1981 broke clear and invigorating over Stanley, the kind of autumn dawn that lured souls outdoors with its promise of crisp air and golden foliage carpeting the lower slopes. The Harlans rose early in their weathered cabin on the outskirts, the scent of sizzling bacon mingling with fresh ground coffee as Elias outlined the itinerary over a topographic map spread on the kitchen table. "We'll loop off Trail Creek, hit the northeast face where the elk bed down rugged but rewarding," he declared, tracing fingers along the contours that depicted the Sawtooth's dramatic rise. A range born from volcanic fury millions of years ago, and sculpted by glaciers into a labyrinth of cirques and spires that still challenge adventurers today. The family loaded their battered Ford Bronco with methodical care, insulated thermoses steaming with black coffee, packs bulging with venison, jerky, apples, and energy bars bartered from neighbors, first aid kits stocked for scrapes or sprains, and the sacred rifles, each inspected with ritualistic attention. Elias's .30-06 oiled to a sheen, Caleb's Remington 700 sighted true, Lena's Winchester balanced for her grip, Tommy's .22 a lightweight companion for small game. By 2:30 p.m. they rumbled out, the Bronco's tires kicking gravel toward the Fish Creek trailhead, a popular entry point into the National Recreation Area, where hikers and hunters converged amid aspen groves turning fiery yellow. Parking amid a scattering of other vehicles, fellow enthusiasts gearing up for the season, they shouldered packs around 3 p.m., boots sinking into the snow-dusted earth, under a sky streaked with high cirrus clouds heralding the golden hour. The initial hours unfolded with rhythmic familiarity, the trail winding upward through stands of subalpine fir and Engelmann spruce, the group's conversation, a lively tapestry of shared memories and tactical banter. Elias led with purposeful strides, pausing occasionally to cup hands and emit a resonant elk bugle that reverberated off the granite walls, drawing distant responses from the herd. Caleb flanked Rite, employing his borrowed thermal imager, a clunky prototype that detected heat signatures through the foliage, muttering observations like, "Got movement at 2 o'clock. Could be a cow." Lena scouted the left flank, her keen eyes picking out rubs on saplings where bulls had marked territory, while Tommy darted ahead in bursts, collecting pine cones or pointing out squirrel tracks with unbridled excitement. Laughter punctuated the ascent, recounts of a botched hunt 2 seasons prior, when Elias's shot spooked a bull into a thicket, or Lena's triumphant tale of dropping a doe at 200 yards in driving rain. As the afternoon waned, the light softened into amber, illuminating the Sawtooth's iconic ridgelines, the Chicken Out Ridge to the south, the alpine lakes glinting like sapphire shards below. They crested a saddle around 5:30 p.m., the air cooling sharply, shadows from the western peaks already pooling in the draws like ink. Elias pressed on, undeterred. Dusk is when they move, stay sharp, eyes open for the guardian's wink. The family adapted, forming a loose line. Rifles at the ready, but fingers off triggers. The thrill of proximity building as faint bugles answered from the timberline. By 6:30 p.m., true dusk had descended. The transition from day to night in the high country swift and absolute, the sun vanishing behind the Tobacco Root Range to the east, while residual glow lingered on the Salmon River Valley far below. The light bled away in layers, first the understory dimming to monochrome, then the canopy overhead fracturing into silhouettes that merged seamlessly with the encroaching dark. The Harlons pushed deeper, their pace quickening with the urgency of the hour, voices carrying in clipped exchanges, Elias's low bugle, Caleb's alert, "Hold scat here." Fresh. Lena's steady, clear left, Tommy's breathless, "Look, that rock looks like a bear." The path narrowed into a game trail, flanked by boulders, moss-covered and ancient, the air heavy with the musk of damp earth and decaying leaves. Shadows from the pines, elongated dramatically, stretching across the ground in distorted forms that played tricks on peripheral vision branches, mimicking limbs, wind gusts, rustling foliage into phantom movements. Elias, ever the veteran, quipped to ease the growing unease. "The old Nez Perce said the shadows stretch to test your nerve. Pass the test." And the elk revealed themselves. But as the last amber faded to indigo, an unnatural hush fell. No bird calls, no rustle of small game, just the crunch of their boots and labored breaths. The group halted in a small clearing off the main path, a natural bowl ringed by rock outcrops and dense thicket, perhaps a bedding site for the herd. Elias knelt to examine a rub, rifle propped nearby. Caleb swept the thermals once more. Lena and Tommy circled the perimeter. Then, an abrupt cessation. No final words exchanged, no cry of alarm, just silence swallowing the scene whole, as if the wilderness had exhaled and drawn them in. The first harbinger of catastrophe emerged at first light the following morning, when a crew of loggers hauling Douglas fir from the lower slopes for a mill order stumbled upon the site while scouting access routes. Cresting a rise near the clearing, one worker, veteran hauler named Roy Dempsey, froze at the sight. 4 rifles arrayed in a precise, almost ceremonial circle, planted upright, with stocks embedded shallow in the needle-strewn soil, barrels angling toward the paling sky, like accusatory fingers piercing the dawn mist. It was Elias's 30-06, unmistakable with its scarred buttplate. Caleb's bolt-action Remington scope still attached. Lena's lever Winchester, chamber empty. And Tommy's diminutive 22, a poignant outlier in the formation. No signs marred the surrounding earth, no boot prints scattered in flight, no blood spatter or torn clothing snagged on thorns, no casings from discharged rounds. Yet the weapons bore fresh defacements, swirling carvings incised into the wood and metal, crude yet intricate patterns resembling elongated eyes fused with claw-like extensions, as if etched by a blade heated to glowing symbols that locals would later link to archaic petroglyphs scattered across the Sawtooth backcountry, remnants of prehistoric inhabitants invoking mountain deities. The air hung still, laced with an acrid tang that Dempsey swore was ozone, like after a lightning strike. But it was the ground that chilled the crew to the core. Arrayed around the rifles in a radiating spiral were elongated tracks, each imprint roughly 18 inches in length and 6 wide, with 5-toed impressions that defied classification, weaving in labyrinthine loops that suggested deliberate pursuit, before terminating abruptly at the base of a sheer granite face rising 20 feet, where no crevice or cave mouth yawned to explain a passage. The patterns evoked neither grizzly paws, too splayed and methodical, nor cougar prints, lacking the feline asymmetry. Instead, they mimicked distorted human strides elongated by some malevolent distortion, fading as if absorbed by the rock itself. Dempsey radioed it in with trembling hands. Found the Harlan gear, looks like they were marked for something unnatural. Word of the discovery rippled through Stanley like a shockwave, igniting a frenzy that mobilized the close-knit community before official channels could fully engage. Elias's brother, Jed Harlan, a wiry ranch hand in his 40s with a face weathered by sun and sorrow, was roused from his shift at the feed store by a frantic call from the sheriff's dispatch. "My brother's rifles, upright like grave markers," Jed bellowed into the receiver. "They don't just set down arms and walk away, something took 'em." Within hours, Jed had rallied a cadre of locals, fellow loggers with chainsaws for clearing paths, ranchers on horseback versed in tracking, even the town's reclusive trapper who knew every hidden draw from decades of solitude. Coffee-fueled vigils sprang up at the trailhead, maps unrolled on tailgates, as theories flew exposure after a slip, a sudden storm they misjudged, or worse, poachers mistaking them for rivals in the competitive elk grounds. By midday, professional search and rescue had descended, a coordinated effort spearheaded by Idaho Department of Fish and Game Wardens, bolstered by Blaine County sheriffs and volunteers from the Boise-based Mountain Search Group. Horses clopped along the trails, their riders scanning ridgelines for flashes of orange hunting vests against the evergreen backdrop. Bloodhounds strained, leashes, noses to the ground in quest of the family's scent amid the confounding overlay of pine resin and animal musk. Overhead, a Bell 206 helicopter thrummed from the Stanley airstrip, its spotters peering through binoculars for any anomaly in the 20-square-mile grid encompassing Fish Creek drainage to the shores of Redfish Lake. Then pushing up the northeast face, where the terrain steepened into alpine meadows, fringed by sheer cliffs, a region still renowned among climbers for its technical challenges and isolation. Ground teams hacked through Devil's Club thickets, their calls Harlan, Elias, Lena, echoing hollowly off the granite. Days blurred into an exhaustive chronicle. The third morning brought false elation, with a shredded jacket caught in a blowdown, its fabric orange like their gear, only to prove it belonged to a lost hiker from weeks prior. By week 2, a warden's dog alerted to elk scat, laced with what appeared human hair under lab lights, but contamination from grooming animals rendered it inconclusive. The runes on the rifles drew anthropologists from the University of Idaho, who cross-referenced them with petroglyph sites like those near City of Rocks, concluding they evoked shadow invocation motifs from indigenous art, possibly warning of spiritual transgression. Forensics teams sifted the clearing micro by micro. Soil samples showed no disturbance beyond the tracks, which plaster casts preserved as baffling anomalies. No matching wildlife database entry. No erosion patterns to explain their formation. Bear activity was charted meticulously, scat piles and claw marks on nearby snags, but none aligned with aggressive patterns or timelines. Jed, sleepless and hollow-cheeked, filled his own journal amid the chaos. The peaks claimed them without mercy. I catch Elias's gravelly laugh on the gusts, but the lengthening shadows only jeer at our futility, stretching our hope thinner than the tracks they chase. As November's heavy snows began blanketing the higher elevations, burying trails under feet-deep drifts that rendered further searches perilous, the operation scaled back. The official verdict? Issued with reluctant finality. Presumed deceased due to environmental hazards or misadventure. Case files sealed in cold storage. A somber ceremony at the local cemetery, marking empty plots with rifles laid atop. Yet the emotional aftershocks rippled outward. Hunting seasons in Stanley dimmed for years. Tags left unfilled in tribute. Families like the Harlan's neighbors instituted dusk curfews for outings, eyes ever darting to peripheral gloom. And in the quiet hours, suspicions festered whispers of a covert wilderness guardians network. Reclusive zealots patrolling the borders of national forest land, enforcing an unspoken code against exploitation through intimidation or worse, their rituals blending eco-activism with age-old mysticism to preserve the Sawtooths from overreach. Those 41 years unfolded like a protracted thaw, the Harlan vanishing, embedding itself into the cultural bedrock of Stanley and the broader Sawtooth region, transforming raw grief into a multifaceted legacy that influenced everything from local customs to national folklore discourse. The immediate aftermath saw the community coalesce in rituals of remembrance. By 1983, an annual vigil took root at the Fish Creek trailhead, locals gathering as twilight fell to tie ribbons of hunter orange to the pines, releasing a chorus of elk bugles that mourned the lost while honoring guardian lore. Jed Harlan became the unofficial steward, converting his brother's cabin into an impromptu museum replicas of the rifles painstakingly carved and etched with replica runes displayed beside framed maps of the search grid. Yellowed news clippings from the Idaho Statesman detailing the Sawtooth enigma. He passed away in 1995 from complications of pneumonia contracted during a winter patrol. His final words to a nephew: "Tell the young ones the mountains don't just grieve, they remember," weaving our shadows into their own. Attendance at these events swelled over the decades, drawing not just locals, but tourists intrigued by the tale, boosting small economies, while perpetuating stories that evolved with each retelling. Early versions, emphasizing bear attacks. Later iterations, delving into spectral elements drawn from Shoshone oral traditions, where elders like those interviewed in Sawtooth Association publications recounted visions of shadow weavers as enforcers of natural law. The drama extended into personal spheres, festering as a generational scar that reshaped lives far beyond the initial loss. Caleb's former sweetheart, now a widowed schoolteacher in Boise named Sarah Wilkins, preserved a trove of his correspondence in a cedar box, letters that captured his internal conflict. These hunts bind us, but if we cling too tight, we lose the wild's freedom. Dad sees progress as betrayal, yet the peaks call me to protect them anew. She shared excerpts at community readings, her voice steady but eyes distant, fueling debates on whether family tensions had precipitated a fatal argument lost to the dusk. Lena's prospective suitor, an interpreter at the nearby Land of the Yankee Fork Museum, spoke in hushed interviews of her fierce independence. Lena aimed to safeguard the wilderness, not succumb to it. She sketched tours for women reclaiming the trails, visions that the mountains silenced too soon. Her absence cast a long pall over emerging female guiding programs in the area, with pioneers citing her as a spectral inspiration. Tommy's peers, growing into adults who navigated the same trails with altered caution, formed informal pacts, avoiding solo dusk ventures, etching protective symbols on their own gear, inspired by the runes. The wound manifested broadly. Younger hunters skirted the northeast face, dubbing it Harlan's Hollow, while elders propagated warnings of dusk hauntings, sightings of elongated shadows that some attributed to optical illusions, others to lingering unrest. Podcasts and true crime outlets amplified the narrative, branding it Idaho's Dyatlov Pass, in homage to the Russian hiker's unsolved fate, spawning wild speculations, covert avalanches, undocumented by weather logs, rival poachers from out-of-state syndicates, or eco-extremist cells descended from 1,970 seconds back to the land movements, patrolling sacred sites with ritualistic fervor to deter commercialization. Even academic papers emerged, linking the case to broader historical contexts. The Sawtooth's mining boom in the 1,880 seconds, where knockers subterranean spirits from Cornish lore warned prospectors of cave-ins, paralleling the guardians as archetypal protectors against exploitation. Through it all, the enigma slumbered uneasily, its files accumulating marginalia in Boise's state archives, faded photos of the rifle circle, cast track molds gathering dust until the digital age's unblinking gaze stirred it anew. That revival ignited in the sweltering heat of summer 2022, when technology, once a punchline in Harlan lore, intervened to bridge eras. Trail cameras had proliferated across the Sawtooths in the preceding decade, deployed by wildlife biologists and outfitters to monitor populations of elk, wolves, and grizzlies rebounding under federal protections, their infrared lenses capturing nocturnal secrets without human intrusion. It was one such device, a rugged Bushnell trophy model, affixed to a fir trunk by motion sensors and solar panels, that veteran outfitter Riley Kane positioned in early July near the coordinates of the old Harlan, clearing his aim to document bear foraging patterns for a grant proposal on habitat corridors. Kane, a 52-year-old Boise native, with a ponytail, graying at the temples, and a resume etched from guiding celebrities through the range's alpine traverses, checked the cam sporadically via Bluetooth app during patrols. Returning to his base camp weeks later for a routine download, intending clips for a low-key YouTube series on Sawtooth secrets, he plugged the SD card into his laptop and watched the feed spool. Hours of mundane footage, a mule deer browsing, a fox kit tumbling through ferns, the occasional owl silhouette. Then, at the 47-minute mark of a late afternoon capture dated August 15, anomaly struck. The image devolved into digital snow, pixels fracturing like shattering ice, audio corrupted by a low-frequency hum that warped the wind's rustle into something choral, almost chant-like. Static cleared in bursts to reveal blurred humanoids. 4 figures in hooded garb, faces obscured by crude masks fashioned from bark and feathers, arrayed in a loose circle amid the very spot where the rifles had stood decades prior. Their hands moved in synchronized arcs, tracing luminous runes in the air that mirrored the carvings on the weapon's elongated eyes and claws, glowing faintly against the encroaching dusk simulation. The timestamp glitched erratically, snapping back to the 17th of October 1981, 6:45 p.m., before stabilizing. No animals in frame, yet shadows on the periphery danced independently, elongating to form the telltale tracks across the leaf litter. Riley's pulse hammered as he replayed it. This defies everything. Cameras don't time travel. Heart pounding, he contacted Forest Service rangers at the Loman station, who escalated to the Blaine County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit, dusting off the Harlan dossier for the first time since the 90 seconds. Forensic scrutiny on the SD card unfolded in layers at the Idaho State Crime Lab in Meridian, a process that blended digital forensics with analog skepticism. Tech analysts authenticated the glitch as genuine artifact, no tampering evident in metadata, the card's encryption intact from factory specs. Yet the visuals eluded easy categorization. The figure's forms registered as thermal anomalies, heat signatures fluctuating like mirages, suggesting either advanced camouflage or optical trickery from environmental interference, perhaps piezoelectric effects from quartz veins in the granite amplifying static. Audio enhancement isolated fragmented whispers in a dialect blending English with Shoshone phonetics. Unworthy. Reclaim. Balance. Cross-referencing with rune databases from the Bureau of Land Management's petroglyph surveys. Experts noted identical motifs from 19th century trapper journals. Symbols invoking Nekia guardians to ward off despoilers. The shadows forming tracks? Enhanced imaging traced them to light refraction off dew-slick rocks, but their precision hinted at deliberate staging. Rangers revisited the site in September, under a harvest moon, unearthing no physical remnants, but confirming the cam's coordinates overlapped the old clearing, now overgrown with huckleberry bushes, a subtle cairn of stones perhaps left by memorial visitors. The footage's eeriness propelled media pickup. Local outlets like the Wood River Journal ran headlines of ghost hunt in Sawtooths, while national podcasts dissected it as tech meets ghost, drawing parallels to quantum anomalies or AI-generated hoaxes. Riley Kane, thrust into reluctant spotlight, recounted his dread. I set that cam for bears, not echoes of the past, but the mountains played it back, runes and all. As if the guardians demanded witness. This digital specter didn't just revive the case,
pulled authorities
it ignited a cascade, leading investigators to a long-forgotten lead. Whispers from Kane's network of a reclusive figure haunting Highway 21 cabins, a man whose description echoed a ghost from 1981
of the woods. Bearded to his chest, with unkempt silver strands, eyes recessed in sockets shadowed by decades of evasion, Caleb eked out existence, trapping furs and foraging, his cabin a clutter of yellowed maps, salvaged radio parts, and stacks of journals bound in leather scraps. Rangers approached with measured caution, presenting the glitch footage on a tablet under the cabin's single bare bulb. Caleb's reaction was visceral, a tremor in his gnarled hands, a choked gasp that devolved into rasping sobs. It took 3 days of gentle coaxing meals, shared over weak tea, shared tales of the peaks to breach his walls. The confession, captured on video in that dim-lit space with only the wind's howl as accompaniment, dismantled the mythos brick by mythos, replacing spectral guardians with human frailty amplified by fanaticism. It wasn't the spirits alone, not entirely, Caleb began, his voice a dry rasp akin to wind-scoured bark, cracking under the strain of unburdening. We all knew the guardian legends from Dad's stories, Shoshone fables he revered like scripture, tales of Nekia weaving shadows to humble the proud, punishing those who took without giving back. Elias. The mill's closure crushed him that year, debts piling like avalanche snow, the weight of feeding us all pressing on his shoulders until he broke quiet like. He confided in me weeks before. Son, we'll rig a scene bear, lure to draw a grizzly, wires to the rifles staging a fight, claim the pelt and tags for quota payout. It'll tide us. Keep the legacy afloat, I argued, but desperation won. We mocked the rites as superstition, planting the bait near the clearing to mimic a natural clash. As dusk fell that day, Caleb recounted the plan unraveled in the gloom. The lure, a potent mix of fish oil and synthetic pheromones, drew not just bears but unintended eyes. The shadows thickened unnatural, but it was them, the Watchers, a cult, fringe eco-guardians, descendants of 70 Seconds hippies, turned zealots, patrolling the deep wild to enforce purity. They'd heard our bugles, saw the setup as desecration, a cheat against the balance. Masked in bark cloaks, they emerged from the rocks silent at first, then chants low and rhythmic. Dad swung his rifle, Lena fired a warning shot. Tommy froze, screaming. They swarmed, not killing outright, but dragging ropes on wrists, gags from rags. I dove behind a boulder, heart thundering, watched them haul the others into a crevice hidden by illusion, rifles seized as trophies. They carved the warnings fresh, runes to scare off copycats. I fled, blind. Amnesia cloaking the horror for years woke in a Boise shelter, pieced fragments while drifting jobs, guilt rooting me here, like a cursed pine. Caleb's Unearthed Journal, a 200-page tome, chronicling his exile, detailed the cult's underbelly, a loose affiliation of ex-rangers, disillusioned activists, and indigenous sympathizers calling themselves Veil Wardens, who staged echo rites annually at desecration sites, ritual reenactments, blending theater with intimidation to perpetuate deterrence. The 2022 glitch, coincidental capture of their October vigil at the Harlan spot, the cam's malfunction, rendering it timeless through electromagnetic quirks from nearby mineral deposits. No bodies ever surfaced, likely relocated to remote caves as lessons, bones left to rejoin the earth. Caleb's outpouring cascaded. I abandoned them to save myself. Betrayed the blood Dad poured into those hunts. The shadows weren't myth. They were our follies, amplified in the dark. He succumbed to heart failure weeks later. His passing closing the chapter officially as misadventure compounded by third-party interference. Yet the Sawtooths withhold final verdicts, their peaks enduring witnesses to unresolved echoes. What lingers for you, cult fanaticism or familial desperation spiraling into doom? Share your theories in the comments. If the shadows stirred something in you, hit like and subscribe to Fractured Fate Files for deeper dives into America's wild enigmas next, the cursed depths of the UP mines. Tread carefully out there. The trails, remember. Thanks for tracking this one with me. Until the next shadow falls.